Well, good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us here this evening for our webinar on the Tacoma LNG facility. I'm Andy Wappler with Puget Sound Energy, and in a few moments we'll introduce our other panelists. But just to begin here tonight, one of the things we do at Puget Sound Energy is we begin any large meeting, in fact, with more than 6 people, with a safety moment. And we do that because safety is important to us. And in fact, over the last couple of years, we've become one of the top quartile utilities in the country on safety for our employees, and we're proud of that. So in terms of safety and what we should all be thinking about this time of year, we've been lucky so far. We haven't had much of a storm season. We had that storm that kind of didn't happen about a month ago, but here we are in November, Thanksgiving week next week. We all know, if you've lived here for a while, that means storm season. So get prepared is kind of our message on safety tonight. And you can go to pse.com or the Pierce County chapter of the American Red Cross. Either place is a great place to go for safety information to make sure you have that emergency kit, because even though our weather recently has been pretty mild for November, chances are that won't last, and we've got a lot of storm season ahead of us. Well, into our topic tonight, which is about our Tacoma LNG facility. And before we get into the discussion, I want to give everyone who's on the line a chance to know just a couple of things about the panel participants. I'm Andy Wappler. I'm Vice President of Corporate Affairs at Puget Sound Energy. I've been with the company for 9 years coming up this February, and my role includes communications, community affairs, as well as customer operations, which are those people at our call center and others who help you out, as well as our website. So it's my pleasure tonight to be the moderator and to be on the panel with 3 experts who know a lot about our facility, about building these facilities around the country, and also about maritime operations. I'll begin by giving a chance to turn it over to Jim Hogan, who's with Puget Sound Energy and is our LNG, or liquid natural gas, project manager. Jim?
Thank you, Andy. I'm Jim Hogan. I've been the project manager of this project since its inception in 2012. I've been doing engineering and construction for 25 years, the last 16 years with Puget Sound Energy.
Well, thanks, Jim. Thanks for being here with us tonight. And also with us tonight from Tote Maritime, Alaska. And Tote is the company that does the shipping from Tacoma up to Alaska and is one of the big customers for this project, fueling their ships, is Seth Storsett. Seth, could you say hello?
Yes, hello. Thank you, everyone, for participating tonight. Once again, my name is Seth Storsett. I work for Tote Maritime, Alaska. I'm the Terminal Operations Manager. I handle loading up our vessels with cargo and getting it on its way to Alaska.
Well, thank you, Seth. And also here tonight is Ken Surasaki. He's the project manager for CBI Services, Inc., and CBI is Chicago Bridge and Iron. And Ken is going to be talking a bit tonight about the construction project. But before you do, Ken, tell us a bit about yourself.
Thanks, Andy. Again, my name is Ken Surasaki. I'm the project manager for CBI Services. I've been with CBI for 35 years. About the last 10 years of it have been LNG related. So we will be doing the engineering and design and construction of the facility.
Well, fantastic, and thank you for being here tonight. Gentlemen, appreciate your time and your ability to answer questions as well tonight. And that's one feature before we jump into the webinar that I'll mention is you can use the keyboard to type in a question, and we'll try to get to those here this evening. Well, first let me just do a little setting the stage here tonight around what is LNG, liquid natural gas, or liquefied natural gas. For starters, if you have a gas stove and you cook dinner tonight, it's the same gas. It's the same methane gas. It is odorless, colorless, and non-toxic. And the odorless part is why we, as a gas utility, add something called mercaptan to the gas that you have in your home, and that is that chemical that gives it that distinctive rotten egg smell, so that if you had a gas leak or some other kind of issue, maybe with your stove or something else, you would know that scent of gas. But the LNG, the liquefied natural gas, is the same gas, methane, that you use in your furnace, your water heater, or your stove. In this case, though, that gas, instead of being at normal ambient temperature, is cooled down to negative 260 degrees Fahrenheit. And if you remember back to high school science class, if you cool a gas down far enough, it turns into a liquid. And that's what this is. It's that same gas you use at home or at a restaurant, liquefied. The reason you liquefy it is it shrinks the volume of the gas, and so we have that beach ball and then that kind of little tiny dot, the gold dot next to it, to show the gas in its typical state, like the beach ball. Then you cool it down, and it gets much smaller, like that little gold dot. And today, we have about 800,000 natural gas customers in our PSC service area, which is most of western Washington, although there are a couple of other gas utilities that serve western Washington as well, but we're the largest in western Washington. And there are about 100 of these LNG facilities around the country. And in fact, Puget Sound Energy has a smaller LNG facility in the Gig Harbor area. And this LNG technology has been used to add gas back into the system on very cold days for about 50 years across the country. A couple other things on natural gas. It is lighter than air, so when there's a leak, it disperses and floats up into the atmosphere. It's also only flammable in a very narrow concentration in the air. And in fact, the liquefied version of natural gas, this LNG, is not explosive. So in some ways, it's very much like the gas you have at home. It is the same gas. In this case, though, it's cold, and that's part of the reason it is an excellent fuel and is becoming a fuel around the world for transportation. So I want to talk a little bit about another project that's been in the area, which is the methanol plant. And a lot of confusion, I think, around these, and frankly, understandably so. You know, unless you're working in this industry, you're probably not watching all of this that carefully. So you're hearing about these two different projects in the news, or maybe social media, or your friends. And since they both start with the same basic product of methane, it's easy to get them confused, but they are very different. So I'll kind of walk through those differences. On the left is a description of the methanol plant, which has now been terminated. And on the right is a description of the PSC Tacoma LNG facility. So kind of looking at those two columns, you get a sense of the difference in size. We're looking at a plant that would produce several million gallons of product a day in the methanol plant versus 1/4 to 500,000 gallons in the Tacoma LNG facility. You can also get some sense of the size when you look at the dollar figures. The methanol plant was a project that was estimated to cost up to $5 billion, whereas the Tacoma LNG facility that PSC is building is a fraction of that at about $300 million. And then, and this became a big issue, I think understandably for a lot of folks at Tacoma, water use. The water use of the methanol plant, more than 10 million gallons a day. The water use for PSC's facility, about 2,000. Now, if you read the EIS, you may have noted it actually mentioned up to 13,000 gallons. We have to put that in the EIS because that's the most the plant could use. But on average, it's about 2,000 gallons compared to 10 million for the water use for the methanol plant that's now been canceled. And you can see it, same thing around the electricity use, about 30 times more electricity being used by that methanol plant, and a big difference in terms of who the end users are going to be. For the methanol plant, the methane gas would be converted into methanol, which is a product that goes into plastics, and that was going to be exported overseas to China. In this case, the PSC Tacoma LNG facility is all about local users. Some that are you and me and people who are at home or at a business using gas, and that would be on very cold days. We can use this facility to release gas back into the system because on a high demand day, sometimes the system is taxed. There are simply a lot of furnaces kicking on at the same time. And also, this is a backup in case the supply to our area in general, and there's one pipeline that serves western Washington. If there were an interruption there, this tank would allow us to have a reserve here in western Washington. So it's local homes and businesses on the coldest days and as kind of a backup to the main pipeline serving the area, and as a clean marine and transportation fuel for ships such as those by tote that come in and out of the port. So big differences in size of the methanol plant compared to the Tacoma LNG facility, and I think most importantly, the methanol plant was about exporting product. The PSC Tacoma facility is about use for homes in our area and businesses on cold days and to fuel ships that come in and out of the port of Tacoma as they do today, but with a cleaner fuel. So on to our next part, which is about where the plant is. And the plant is located in the port of Tacoma area. And I'm going to turn it over to our project manager, Jim Hogan, to talk a little bit more about the site and some of the other aspects of safety. Jim?
Thanks, Andy. So the LNG facility is located on the Blair-Hylabost Peninsula in the Port of Tacoma, and we have a 30-acre site that was a former Navy base. As Andy mentioned, that in its liquid state, LNG is not flammable. In the event that LNG would be released, it turns back into vapor, and that's much like boiling water and converting water from a liquid state to steam. When it does turn back into vapor, there is a certain period of time where that gas does have the potential to be ignited, and therefore we must plan accordingly for that. Although those types of events are very rare, the regulations for designing and siting an LNG plant do require us that we study and model all events that have a certain probability that they might happen. And that is the information that's included in the siting report that there have been some discussions about. And the regulations require that we look at all those events and that we have a third-party engineering firm model the events, and then also anything that happens, any release we have, needs to stay within our control. So that model does validate that any of our spill events that should occur would stay within the property lines of our facility. Additionally, we also look at various fire scenarios that could happen. And the regulations also require that at the property line of the facility, there's a certain amount of heat coming off the facility that allows essentially for us to maintain any amount of heat that's harmful or dangerous within our own property line. And so when we talk about events staying inside our property line, that's all driven by the federal codes that govern siting and design of the facility.
Well, thanks, Jim. And I want to mention one thing. You had mentioned 30 acres of the site, and 30 acres of the site as compared to, if folks are wondering, well, could this ever be used for export? I did a little research, and one of the facilities that's being considered for export, the Sabine Pass facility, is a 1,000-acre site and an $11 billion project. So here we're talking 30-acre site, $300 million project versus 1,000 acres for an export facility. So I think it's an important point of differentiation in terms of the size. And you mentioned, too, the siting studies, and now those siting studies are available through the City of Tacoma website. The Tacoma News Tribune also covered them and put them online. And if you go to our Tacoma LNG website, you'll also find that you can link there, and you can see the arrangement to be able to see the studies yourself in person if you want to, or you can come Monday night to the open house we're having. You can come and read the studies and see them there. So if folks are interested in some of the details about what you're talking about, they'll have the ability to actually read those studies a number of different ways.
Correct. We'll also have folks on hand to answer questions about the studies as well.
Very good. And I think as we move through into the presentation, too, talking a bit about the facility, we'll show you on the next slide a picture of what we're looking at there on the Port of Tacoma. So maybe, Jim, kind of describe what people are seeing here.
Certainly. So the picture on the left is looking down from the northeast Tacoma area at the site. The predominant feature at the site now is a 250,000 square foot warehouse. This site for the last many years has been used as a logistics center with trailers and trains coming into the site and moving cargo from trains to trailers or vice versa. We'll be demolishing all of the buildings on the site except for two. The buildings are old. They have some contamination issues, and basically we'll be cleaning the site back up, putting in an entire new stormwater system, and then building our new facility. So on the right, you'll see that the tank then becomes the prominent feature of the site, but most of the actual 30-acre site is relatively vacant. The process equipment to make the actual LNG is relatively small, and in general, the site will be just a gravel lot.
All right, and I'll take one of the questions that has come in. It was on why couldn't we just pipe in more gas on the cold days? And I think that really gets to the issue of there is one large pipe that serves western Washington, and this helps in case you had a failure of that pipe. This also, because of the location of the facility, allows us to then inject more gas, which would be gas as you find in your home, that gas can be injected into the system near the user. So a couple of questions there around why would you be here versus not just using a pipeline from someplace else. This is partly a backup in case you don't have that pipeline. Another question, which I think we'll get to the answer in a little more detail in a bit, but the question was around, of the 100 other LNG facilities like Tacoma, how many are near neighborhoods? Well, as I mentioned, we do have an LNG facility, smaller, but it's in Gig Harbor. And later on, we'll also see some pictures, too, of a facility that is in Connecticut, that is in an urban area. And, in fact, the tank is virtually a twin to this tank. So we'll get to that in a moment, but I wanted to let people know if they're asking questions that we were able to see them. And, Jim, I know we mentioned the siting and the design. So this is kind of the conceptual picture that we're seeing right now on the right of the tank. But we also have a more detailed drawing here as well.
Yes, thanks, Andy. So the siting report contains a number of different diagrams and pictures. And in that report, you'll see both models of the different vapor clouds. And this drawing that we have on here now shows actual thermal radiation. So this...
Wait a minute, Jim.
Excuse me.
Thermal radiation.
Yes.
What would the rest of us call that?
Heat.
Thank you.
So in this case, we've taken our worst-case fire scenarios at the site, and the circles around each of these areas represent a spill and a fire from these areas. And as you can see, our worst-case scenario has a radius of 550 feet that, in order to meet code, the public needs to stay out of that area, and that circle fits within our 30-acre site. And there's a whole lot more pictures in the siting report of all different types of scenarios. We just picked this one as an example.
Thanks. That's good to see that. And again, for people who are interested in seeing the siting report, and CB&I, again, is Chicago Bridge and Iron. And, of course, we have an expert from CB&I here tonight. He'll talk more about it in detail, and they will also be at the open house coming up on Monday. But that's a page from the report, and folks can see that report now, online through the City of Tacoma, also the Tacoma News Tribune, but also Monday night at the open house. The project kicked off a couple years ago. In fact, my first exposure to the idea, I was having actually a visit to the Port of Tacoma, and that's when I learned that the EPA was going to be changing some of the rules around what shipping could do, sort of like the emissions from your car. And that was back, I think, for me, around 2011, maybe 2012. And that was when I first learned that this would be changing in shipping and about LNG. But our project's been in development for several years. And on the next page, we have some timelines. And, Jim, maybe you could talk a bit about that, the timelines that are there. And I know for folks it's probably a little hard to see, but this is basically on the left a list of the different permits that are involved. That first group at the top is the environmental impact statement, shoreline permit, and others. Then the next group down below are regulatory, which for us, the WUTC is the Washington Utilities and Transportation Commission, and they are the regulator around consumer protection. And then down to the left there in the purple, that's the construction permits. So that's kind of the lay of our map. Every star was a point where there was a public involvement opportunity, but maybe you could kind of walk us through what's in there and talk a bit about some of the agencies that have been involved in this review.
Certainly. So to build this LNG facility, we've had involvement with 16 different local, state, and federal agencies. As Andy mentioned, there is a significant number of different permitting and approval processes we've gone through. We started our initial discussions with some of the federal agencies back in 2012, and as the project developed, getting into 2013 and 2014, we started more of the formal process of gaining permits. One of the things that people are probably most familiar with is the environmental impact statement that we filed. That document is about 700 or 800 pages, I believe. That goes through all of the different impacts of the facility, and that was, as you can see, done mostly in 2014 and 2015. Because we are building in the marine area, we were constructing a structure on the shoreline. There's a significant involvement from Washington Department of Fish and Wildlife, the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, et cetera, and a lot of look at how that construction impacts the environment. Otherwise, it's really an alphabet soup of different agencies and permits. Along with that, we've had to have regulatory approval of our business structure for the project. That was a process that we went through well over a year to make sure that the Utility Commission felt that this was beneficial for our ratepayers, and then getting down into the nitty-gritty of actually constructing the plant. We have a number of permits in hand that allow us to do construction, and then the ongoing construction of the project is a little less than 3 years, and we'll be bringing the project online in the fall of 2019.
Very good. I'm going to dig in a little bit, too, to that regulatory piece. And I mentioned earlier that the Washington Utilities and Transportation Commission had approved the business structure of the plant. They are not a safety regulatory agency in terms of the plant siting, although they have an Office of Pipeline Safety. That has been involved. But the UTC's main role in their approval of the plant was around the structure of the plant. And I know there's been a lot of questions and talk on social media about consumer protection, which is really at the core of the UTC's mission. They approved the structure of the plant where part of the plant, the part that serves all of us who have a home that might benefit someday from the cold weather aspects of the plant, that cost is allocated to regular PSC natural gas customers, but the part of the plant and the output that goes to the other customers, the towed and other maritime and transportation customers, that's a separate business. And the consumer protection here is that the UTC approves that no costs that go to that piece of the business, that marine transportation, none of that can go on the backs of regular customers. That was the UTC's role, and they approved that a couple weeks ago. I think it was on October 31st. And in that process, the UTC is not the lone agency. There's also the State Attorney General's office here in Washington, as well as industrial gas users, industrial gas customers, and others who have an interest in consumer protection around energy. So just to kind of unpack all the details around that regulatory part of the picture, I want to get to one question, too, that just popped up. Someone asked in the siting report about the scenarios, and if I recall reading correctly, there were some 200 different scenarios in the siting report of looking at different things that could happen. We'll get into that in a moment, but I didn't want the person who was asking the question to think we were going to bypass it. I want to let, though, when we get to Ken from CB&I talk about that, but I just want to let the person who's asking know we saw the question. We will get there. So in terms of the impacts, you mentioned the environmental impact statement. Let's talk a bit about the environmental aspects then of LNG. And the percentages we see here are in comparison to the diesel or the petroleum product that the ships have today. Maybe you could talk a bit about the difference of why LNG is becoming something for the environment and shipping.
Yes, so recently, or not so recently, there was an international treaty signed that created an emission control area, which is a 200-mile area around North America. And inside that emission control area, or ECA as it's called, it requires ships to operate with lower sulfur emissions. So traditional marine fuel does have a fair amount of emissions, and so ship operators began looking at what their options were to build or to operate cleaner. If people are familiar with methane as a fuel, like compressed natural gas, in King and Pierce County, we have an awful lot of buses that run on compressed natural gas. Most of the garbage trucks run on compressed natural gas, and this is really no different. It's a very clean fuel, and so the shipping industry is now looking for a way to run on methane. Due to the size issues of compressed natural gas versus liquefied natural gas, as Andy mentioned earlier, by liquefying the natural gas, you can carry more in a smaller area. But you can see here that it is quite a significant difference between a diesel-type fuel and the methane that's burned. Also, as you compare natural gas to other fuels such as propane, oil, or coal, there's a significant reduction in carbon dioxide emissions.
And that's that chart there on the right. So the natural gas is the blue bar, and it is the lowest in terms of CO2 emissions compared to either propane, oil, or coal. And I think that the key here environmentally, too, Pierce County and Tacoma has dealt with air quality issues over the years. Wood stoves and other things have been in the news. particularly that particulate matter piece is important, thinking about visibility, clean air over Commencement Bay, a really significant difference here between the heavy petroleum products and natural gas, right there as the ships are coming in and out of the harbor.
Correct.
All right, well, we've looked at the environmental impacts here. I'd like to turn the page now and talk a bit about the economy. And one thing about this, we're going to talk a bit about the new jobs that come in either during construction or operation, but I don't want to overlook the existing jobs and how having the ability of ships at the Port of Tacoma be able to convert to this clean fuel, as we're talking about tighter emissions rules. The Longshoremen's Local there, 23, 1,500 jobs is how many folks they say are employed out of the Port of Tacoma today. So that's that idea of maintaining hundreds of good-paying family wage jobs now. By having a clean fuel at the Port of Tacoma, the Port of Tacoma can continue to be a competitive port. And as we've seen over the years, there's a lot of competition with ports in B.C. or California or where have you. So being able to switch to this clean fuel as much of the world is switching there, really important for keeping those jobs. And again, the local Longshoremen's Union, Warehousemen's Union, thinks about 1,500 jobs today there at the port. And then, Jim, if you could talk a bit about then the construction and the ongoing jobs from the site.
Certainly. So during construction, we will peak at around 250 construction workers. These are union jobs that are fairly well paid, and of course, those folks spend money and feed their families and things like that. And then also, of course, there's quite a bit of construction materials that are purchased locally, which also helps drive the economy. Ongoing, we're anticipating there'll be 18 employees at the site. Again, those will be skilled jobs that are family wage jobs or better. And those folks, again, those are new jobs that don't exist right now. And as people spend their money, it multiplies, and it ultimately should support over 100 new jobs in the region. And then lastly, it is a project, it's an improvement to the port, and it's an improvement to the existing use of that site, and that generates millions of dollars in tax revenue through property tax, sales tax, et cetera, both during construction and then also long-term when the project is in operation.
And while we're on the subject of taxes, I'll mention there's a question that came in about a tax exemption that went through for the use of the fuel. And I think as that tax exemption has maybe been talked about, people have assumed it's somehow a tax exemption that benefited PSC. It actually really benefits our customers. And the change in the tax was this, to recognize that the fuel used as a transportation fuel should be taxed as a transportation fuel, not taxed as if it were the natural gas that was in someone's furnace at home. So it was really a tax exemption not to give you the opportunity not to pay taxes, but to frankly pay the correct tax and have the transportation fuel be taxed as a transportation fuel, as opposed to having that fuel taxed as if it were being used in a home or a business for heating. So that was a question that came in around taxes. And we had another question, too, if we could scroll up on the questions that I saw. And let's see if I can find it here. I'm looking for the question that came by. We can go a little bit down the questions. It's right near the bottom. I can see the questions that are scrolling in, so bear with me for a moment. It was a question about shore power. So the question was about if the ships already plug into electric shore power, how does LNG help the local air quality and emissions? So maybe you could talk about that for a moment, Jim. My sense is the difference is we're not talking about powering the ships while they're at their berth. We're talking about powering them as they're going up and down Puget Sound.
That's correct.
So there's a difference that I know there's been a little confusion about it. It is great that the ships are on shore powers. It's called electric power. That helps them not sit and idle, if it would be like a car or a truck. But this is a fuel for the ships as they are coming in and out of Commencement Bay and on their way to Alaska. Well, our next subject here tonight, looking at the economy, is a bit about TOTE and TOTE's leadership in the industry on LNG. And I want to turn it over to Seth Storsett. Seth is with TOTE and part of their team in Tacoma. And maybe, Seth, if you could talk a little bit about TOTE and what you're doing and your leadership around LNG, and frankly also just a bit about your operations in Tacoma, kind of what happens there and what do you do in Tacoma?
Absolutely. Yeah. So for those of you who don't know much about Tote Maritime, we have two vessels that call between the Port of Tacoma and the Port of Anchorage, 2 weekly sailings, Wednesday and Friday nights. We've been doing this for 41 years, just out of the Port of Tacoma. We supply 1/3 of the goods that go there. That includes milk, apples, clothing, vehicles, construction materials, you name it, we can take it there. We are basically a lifeline to Alaska. So I just want to talk about a few of the environmental things that we've done in the past and that we're continuing to work to do. We're really a leader in the industry. We have rain gardens at our terminal that take about 80% of the heavy metals that would go into Commencement Bay and pulls those out. We also connect our ship to shore power, as we were talking about earlier. So that allows us to shut our generators down while we're in port and not put off any emissions. And currently, we're the only ones in the Puget Sound that do that. So it's something that we're proud of. So another piece that we currently have as it relates to LNG is our sister company, Tote Maritime Puerto Rico, that calls between Jacksonville, Florida, and San Juan, Puerto Rico, is currently operating 2 LNG vessels. They're the first 2 in the world to do basically cargo. We've been successfully filling these ships for nearly a year without any incident. Like our sister company, we plan to do the same thing here. We'll be converting our vessels to run on LNG. And so with that, the tote ships will exceed EPA's new stricter emissions standards. And that means clean air for the Port of Tacoma, the Port of Anchorage, and really for our entire environment. Tote is excited to work with PSA to enrich our economy and improve the environment that we live and work in.
And Seth, I'll mention too, there's a question or a comment that came through a moment ago, and my apologies, we said something that was unclear around the emissions. Someone said, are you saying that the emissions across Puget Sound generally will be down 70 to 90%? No. What we're saying is on a ship-to-ship basis, if you ran a ship with a maritime bunker fuel or heavy diesel, the emissions would be greater than they are with LNG. So for a ship running one fuel versus the LNG, that's where we're looking at this reduction of anywhere up to 70 to even 100%, depending on which particular emission you're talking about. So we're talking every time there about versus today's fuel, what tomorrow's fuel's benefits are. So if we said something that implied overall emissions, didn't mean to say that, talking on a comparison of running the ship with today's fuel versus a cleaner fuel tomorrow. Well, I'm very glad that we could also talk to our expert here from Chicago Bridge and Iron, or CB&I. We've had a couple of different questions around plant and plant design, and in fact, one of the questions was, are any of these facilities near neighborhoods? And this is a picture from Westbury, Connecticut. And to talk a bit more about the plant and plant construction, is a veteran of that industry. So Ken, I'd like to turn over to you. And this is Ken from CB&I.
Thank you, Andy. The picture you're looking at, Yankee Gas, was built back in 2008, went into service in the winter of 2008, and you can see it's surrounded by houses and things like that. That tank is actually 50% larger than the tank we're proposing in Tacoma, and it's operated safely. Matter of fact, we went back in recently and expanded that facility because the utility needed more liquefaction ability. For those of you who don't know CB&I, we were founded back in 1889 in Chicago, and for the last 127 years, we've built up to a company that we're now 40,000 people around the world. The LNG industry, we started about 1958 with the first containment tanks, and we've built entire facilities since then. We are a leader in that industry. Like I said, we've done these all over the world. And for this facility, to touch on one of the comments We do everything safety-wise on this Tacoma facility that we do with every facility in the U.S. In the U.S., it's governed by federal regulation for safety requirements. All the siting is prescribed by PHMSA and FERC, but PHMSA is the guiding guidelines for here, and they tell you exactly how to site a facility.
And just for those who are not fully up to speed on all the utility acronyms, PHMSA is the Pipeline and Hazardous Materials Safety Administration?
Sounds, yeah.
Okay. And that is a federal agency. So I didn't mean to interrupt you, but we utility people sometimes dive into our acronyms, so I want to make sure we could let folks know what that is.
Yeah, and like I said, we've done over 200 facilities around the world since we started working on these. We've developed a lot of the safety requirements for the existing facilities now.
Maybe if you could talk a little bit about the tank, and also, Ken, the liquefied natural gas when it's in the tank, a little bit about, is it under pressure, a little bit about kind of what the tank is built like, and the gas itself when it's in the tank.
The tank itself is basically like a giant thermos. It's operates about 1 psi. It's an internal nickel tank. Nickel being a special material that handles the minus 260-degree material, which we helped develop. It's insulation in between that. Then there's an outer tank made of concrete. So it is the most robust design you can get to on an LNG tank. And it came through after 50 years of development along the way.
We had a couple questions, too, around the scenarios. So as we're talking about the siting report, what are the kinds of scenarios that you'll look at that you say, here are the things we're considering. If an event like this happened, we want to know how the tank, the facility is going to perform. What do you look at? Earthquake? Do you look at what kinds of things?
Okay, that's a big question. To start with, the scenarios, like I said, were defined by PHMSA, and we run through all those. And that basically, you take every single pipeline, every single product, analyze it, run it through the set of calculations required, and what you see in that siting report are the worst-case scenarios for every one of those. But we also looked at earthquake, and your local companies and PSC hired somebody to put together the earthquake scenarios we have to design to. They put that together, and it's a very large earthquake requirement. The tank itself is sitting on isolators, just like you have for your buildings, except these are very, very robust design. And so the tank can move freely with the earthquake. It saves the tank itself. The piping attached to the tank and the piping all through the facility is all designed for the same earthquake requirements. And what else do we need there?
Well, I think you covered it. I was going to mention, too, you mentioned about the requirements. I had read that the tank was built to withstand a once in every 2,450-year earthquake, whereas our interstate highways are built to a once in every 1,000-year earthquake. So really a pretty high standard if you compare it in thinking about the other sorts of major infrastructure we might have. And the siting report that you did, if you are a reader of the Tacoma News Tribune, they took the report, they had some experts look at it, and so if you're a Tacoma News Tribune reader, you can look at that, and their conclusion was that within foreseeable scenarios that the tank was safe and met the standards of the state-of-the-art here today.
Right, and again, those scenarios are defined by the federal government. So it's not anybody gets to choose. You run through the calculations the federal government requires you to do. You come up with the answers, and then you solve the problem for those worst-case scenarios.
That's great, and that was one of the questions that just popped up, was who determines the data and the scenarios, PSC or the regulator, and the answer is the federal regulator.
And I saw one other question that the other agencies involved besides PHMSA, the PHMSA is really working through the Washington Utility Board, Safety Board. Mm-hmm. They're the ones who are helping work through the safety requirements also.
And as we go further along in this process, Jim, I know that the Tacoma Fire Department has a role, and they will continue that as we move into more of the, what I guess I'll loosely call the building and occupancy types of permits that come with any structure.
Yes, so actually from a safety standpoint, we have 3 regulators that are heavily involved in reviewing everything we do. So you have the Utility Commission Pipeline Safety Office, also the Tacoma Fire Department, and then the Coast Guard plays a large role in safety of this facility because it's on the water. So this facility has to meet the safety requirements of not only LNG regulations, but also Coast Guard regulations. And when in doubt, or when those two regulations conflict, we take the more severe of the two.
I should mention, too, that in addition to those agencies reviewing the siting report, the Puyallup Tribe has also reviewed the siting report, and we respect and appreciate their involvement, and they're taking the time to review that report. But the tribe, federal, state, and also then local agencies and the fire department involved in being able to see this safety modeling. And you, too, as a consumer, as a resident, again, you'll be able to look at all of that material either at our open house or some different online sources. So that is that's kind of the story there, I think, around the safety aspects of the plant. We have other questions. We'll try and get to them here this evening. And again, want to mention that coming up, we're going to have our LNG open house, and also we're going to have our telephone town hall coming up here in a few weeks. I'll give you some of the data around those. The open house is Monday the 21st from 7 to 8:30, and also we're going to have at the Tacoma Convention Center, and we're also going to have a telephone town hall on December 1st from 7 to 8 p.m., and you can also email us if you want to participate or have a question at tacomacleanlng@psc.com. So you can email, you can come in person on Monday night, or on the telephone town hall on Thursday, December 1st from 7 to 8. Well, we've managed to run through most of the questions here this evening. There was a question about a federal regulator with jurisdiction over the plant, and the answer is yes, federal regulators do have jurisdiction, and as we mentioned earlier, all of that siting is then governed by FERC and PHMSA in terms of the safety. Well, thanks to everyone who managed to come in. We got one more question I'll try and get to. It was talking about some of the other aspects of the plant. We do have the LNG, but there's also some gases that are used for refrigeration, propane, benzene, and ethylene, and some questions around that and were they modeled. So I'll throw that either to Ken or to Jim to talk a bit about the uses of those gases, how much there is to the plant, and is that part of the safety modeling too?
It was part of the safety modeling. It's in the safety report that's out there. Just like everything, like I said, all the products, all the pipeline, all the facility has to be modeled. It has to be analyzed. And so if you look in that report, you will see that the what we call the MR gases, those other gases, are part of that review.
All right. Well, thank you to everyone who joined us here this evening. We appreciate you coming. And again, Monday night, the 21st, or our telephone town hall on Thursday, December 1st. And, of course, you can email us with the number you want us to call before November 30th if you want to take part in the telephone town hall. And, of course, you can also email questions there as well to tacomacleanlng@psc.com.
Andy, I have one note on here because there was a question up there about marine loading in Yankee Gas in Connecticut. They do not have marine loading there.
Okay, very good.
That was a question up there.
And there's also a question about when FERC looked at the facility and did they review the siting report and when did they issue the decision?
So this is not a FERC jurisdictional plant. So some plants that are built, depending on the use of the plant, they fall under FERC, which is the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission. And those plants are typically the large import or export facilities. If you build a FERC plant, you have to meet the exact same siting rules, but FERC is involved because of the use of the plant. In our case, it's under the jurisdiction of PHMSA and the Washington Utilities Transportation Commission.
If a FERC facility would follow the PHMSA requirements. PHMSA is the governing body of how to site a facility. So we're following those same rules.
Well, Very good. Thank you, all three, for being here tonight. Seth, Ken, and Jim, for being able to talk in some detail. And again, I'd encourage folks, if they have more questions, to come on Monday, the 21st. The same people and more will be available to answer your questions. We'll have more information. We'll have the sighting reports. So, again, if you're interested, if you have a question that we didn't get to, or maybe you spend a couple days and you're thinking about a new question, we'd like to see you Monday night, 7 to 8:30 at the Convention Center at 1500 Broadway. Thanks to everyone who joined us here this evening. Appreciate your interest in this project, and you're taking the time to become informed this evening. We appreciate it. Gentlemen, appreciate you being with us tonight. Everybody have a great and safe evening, and thank you again for being with us.